This video is on Section 1 of Chapter 1, Basic Concepts of College Algebra. The essential question is, what are some of the basic symbols and rules of algebra? We're going to start off by talking about the real number system. This is basically what we need and what we use in all of algebra. This diagram represents the real number system. The smallest circle labeled natural or counting numbers are just that, the counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then the next largest circle includes the whole numbers where we add 0 to the counting numbers. Then the next largest circle is the integers, which add the negative numbers to the whole numbers and counting numbers. And then the last large circle is the rational numbers, or fractions, if you will. Okay? These are fractions that we add to integers, whole numbers, and counting numbers. Then finally we have a separate circle on the right, which are the irrational numbers like pi, the square root of 2, 2.718, etc. So this represents the irrational numbers. So all of this entire diagram here represents all the real numbers. Now, a good way to get a picture of the real numbers is to use a number line. Now, here you can see a picture of a number line. Notice that 0 is at the middle. That's typically what we do with a number line, and we normally put 0 at the middle, but it doesn't have to be. To the right of 0 are the positive numbers, increasing to the right, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To the left of the 0 are the negative numbers, and decreasing, -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. Now, the further you are to the right on the number line, the larger the number is, whether we are talking positive or negative. If you're to the right, you're larger. If you're to the left, you're smaller. So when we are talking about numbers that are greater or less than another number, or in other words, inequalities, we need to talk about the less than and greater than signs. For example, if A is less than B, or A is less than B, if the number A is to the left of the number B on the number line. Similarly, if A is greater than B, or A is greater than B, if the number A is to the right of the number B on the number line. For example, let us say we've got the inequality -5 is less than -2. Now, if we look at the number line, we find -5 is located right here, and -2 is located right here. So -5 is less than -2, or -5 is to the left of -2. So now let's introduce some algebra into the situation. So let's say I've got an example of x is less than 3. How am I going to represent that on the number line? Well, so we look at our number line and we find 3 on it. Now, notice our example. Our example says x is less than 3. It cannot equal 3, but it's less than 3. So at 3, we are going to have to put a parentheses. So, let's see, okay, at 3, we've got ourselves a parentheses, and then x is less than, that means it's to the left, and we've got something that looks like that. All right? So x is less than 3. We've got a parentheses at 3, and it's all the values to the left of 3. So now let's look at another example of x being less than or equal to 3. Notice the difference in the sign. Now I have a single line under the less than. So that means it could be less than 3, but it could also be equal to 3. So we get our number line. First thing, we look for the 3. But instead of having a parentheses at the 3, we're going to have a bracket, which is something that's going to look like this. Okay? And then we will, again, put everything to the left of that. Okay? So x is less than or equal to 3, we put a bracket, and then it's all values to the left of 3. So now let's look at another example. Let's say I've got minus 2 is less than x is less than 4. How am I going to represent that on a number line? So again, I'm going to look for minus 2, and I'm going to look for 4. Again, we don't have any equals. It's less than in both cases. So at 4, I'm going to have a parentheses. And at minus 2, I'm going to have a parentheses, but going in the opposite direction. And the values that we want are between minus 2 and 4. So it's basically these values in here. Everything between minus 2 and 4, but not including minus 2 and 4. So now let's look at another example. In this case, we've got the same numbers, but now we are saying minus 2 is less than x is less than or equal to 4. So let's look how we would represent this on the number line. Okay, so again we find minus 2 and 4. First I'm going to find 4, but notice x could equal 4, so I'm going to have to put a bracket there. So at 4, there's going to go a bracket. And at minus 2, since x can't equal minus 2, it's only a parentheses. And then it's all the values in between here. So minus 2 is less than x is less than or equal to 4. We've got a parentheses at minus 2 because x cannot equal minus 2, but we've got a bracket at 4 because x could equal 4. One other thing I'd like to expand on with these last two examples is I've shown you how to graph these on the number line. Now I want to show you how to write it in interval notation. Looking at the example where I had minus 2 is less than x is less than 4, I would simply write it as parentheses minus 2 comma 4 parentheses. So it would look like this. For the second example where I have minus 2 is less than x is less than or equal to 4, the interval notation would be parentheses minus 2 comma 4 bracket. Notice we use the parentheses in the bracket just like we did on the number line, but this would be the example of interval notation for each of these examples. Now lastly, the first example where I only had one number and I had x is less than or equal to 3, in that case we would simply add the infinity, which is, you might think of it as being an 8 on its side. So we got parentheses, infinity, comma, 3, bracket. In other words, it's everything between infinity and 3. Technically, that would also be minus infinity. So we might think of putting a minus there as well. So it'd be minus infinity to 3. One last thing I'd like to talk to you about, and that is absolute value. So what is absolute value? Absolute value is simply the distance from 0 on a number line. Remember, distance is always positive. You can never have negative distance. So it's the it's the distance from 0 on a number line. It's always positive, and it's represented by two vertical lines. Another way of looking at it is the absolute value of x is equal to x if x is greater than 0, in other words, positive, or it's equal to minus x if x is less than 0 or negative. I would now like you to answer the following questions and post your answers in the Dropbox.